Welcome to the People Leader Accelerator podcast. I'm executive coach Jess Yuen, joined by my co-host, the co-founder and managing partner of People Leader Accelerator, Andrew Bartlow. On this show, we dive deep with business and HR leaders to uncover what really works when it comes to building high-performing organizations, navigating leadership challenges, and making better management decisions. Whether you're the first people leader at a startup or a seasoned executive at a company with scale, you'll find practical insights you can apply right away. For show notes and free bonus resources, visit peopleleaderaccelerator.com/podcast. And if you're looking for hands-on support from developing your leaders to creating a high-performance culture to hiring the right people, visit us at peopleleaderaccelerator.com. We'd love to help. Let's get into today's episode.
We are speaking with Brad Warga and Ben Dewar to learn more about executive search, especially as it relates to human resources, the HR function in technology companies. We tend to spend more time in startups and scale-ups than enterprise. Brad and Ben, you were nice enough to agree to join us. I know both of you through a couple of different avenues. Like Ben, you just impressed me tremendously when I saw you at the Hunt Scanlon PE and VC talent partner event back in San Francisco earlier this year. You were up on stage just speaking wisdom. I approached you afterwards and said, hey, I'd really love to get to know you. And since then, you've been a guest speaker and subject matter expert for People Leader Accelerator. You've already had your arm twisted to do this for the second time in the cohort that we're in the midst of right now. So, big thank you to you, Ben. And Brad, I've known you for a little longer. You're with a huge exec search firm, Heidrick & Struggles, have been in-house. I honestly don't even remember how we first got connected, whether I was a candidate or you were looking to network. But I've been, just tremendously impressed by your work and that of your firm, and thought it would be really interesting to have so much depth of exec search here together. The two of you know each other. I found out that you're neighbors. Didn't realize that. Wave when you mow the yard if you do that yourselves. And I thought it would be really interesting to get the two somewhat differing perspectives of maybe larger, later stage organizations versus smaller, earlier stage organizations. Both your clients as well as your firms are different sizes and stages. So that's maybe more intro than we needed, but just really appreciate the two of you joining. Would love to give both of you an opportunity, maybe starting with Brad, just to share a little bit more about your background and your focus area right now.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Excited to be here and excited to share the stage with Ben. I'm now coming up on 10 years with Heidrick, always 100% focused on HR officers. We focus on, I would say, mid to late stage venture-backed companies, private equity, all the way up to the Fortune 1000, and place chief people officers in one level down. I was an operator prior to coming into search, which has been helpful in terms of knowing what good HR looks like and being able to assess talent. Also, just having a lot of empathy for both candidates and clients.
Love it. Well, thanks a lot. Ben, how about you? What's the nickel tour of your background and what you're focused on today?
Yeah, like Brad, also based in Marin in the Bay Area, came to search as a recovering lawyer, still recovering day to day. But that got me into legal search in the beginning when I was at Russell Reynolds, and then a decade at True Search where I started to focus on the earlier stage stuff. I wanted to go work with like the younger, sexier tech firms. And so did that for a decade. And along the way, picked up HR as my other area of expertise in addition to legal. And with the prominence of like HR searches and the growing importance in organizations over the last 10, 15 years, like it quickly became the vast majority of the work that I've done. And then about 18 months ago, got together with friends from Russell Reynolds and True and other places to go build the next great search firm where think of it as a small sort of special forces boutique called New. And we continue to focus on the portfolio company work, primarily venture growth PE-backed companies, building up, leveling their executive team. So like Brad and I'll cross over sometimes where we'll run into each other on searches for the later stage of those, but also going down to like very early stage startups as well.
Well, thanks a lot. And hey, between the two of you, we might have the market covered.
I think so. I mean, we definitely have so much wisdom between the two of you. We looked up on your backgrounds on LinkedIn and we were like, wow, I think there's between the two of you more than like a half a century of experience, which is incredible. I mean, diving right in, I would love to hear more about like what does this talent market look like right now? I think some years ago, pre-pandemic, I'd written this article called "The Hottest Hypergrowth Hire is the Chief People Officer." And I'm curious, based off of what you're seeing with HR roles right now, is it still as hot?
Yeah, I mean, happy to start. I think things have been firing on all cylinders for us. Like, if you look at the Fortune 1000, about 30% of those chief people officers are at retirement age. So there's just a tremendous amount of movement. And I think coming out of the pandemic, not enough succession work to get number twos ready. And so there's actually been a tremendous amount of work in public companies to invest in a number two that's going to be ready within 12 to 18 months to take the top job. And we're seeing unique combinations of roles, like people are combining talent acquisition and talent management under one leader, combining talent management and HR BPs under one leader, or expanding the total rewards role to include much more of the HR operational elements. And that's all in the hopes of developing more succession paths. In private equity, I mean, that's got an extremely frothy. People are putting money to work. Even though the exits may have slowed down, there's no shortage of roll-ups and a lot of activity in health tech, in wealth management, in media. And then the VC world that Ben and I both play in, certainly in Silicon Valley, anything touching AI is going crazy. And so we've seen this new war for talent, including chief people officers that know how to attract the $100 million engineers that we're seeing those offers go out to. So it's been a great start to the year. I think we'll probably talk about what's changed, but contributing to the demand is that CEOs and founders across all three of those public companies, VC and private equity, really have all changed their requirements for the role. And that's created more of a shortage because the playbooks that you had pre-pandemic from academy companies just aren't as relevant anymore. And so the change in the role is really around this business first principle thinker, creative problem solver, naturally analytical, intellectually curious. And Jess, there's just, I think historically not enough of those individuals have chosen HR as a profession. We're seeing more demand than we have supply at the moment.
Fascinating. And I'm curious with that, does that mean then the profiles of candidates that CEOs and founders are gravitating towards, are those coming from outside of HR more so than those who've grown up in it? Or are you still seeing a mix on that front?
Yeah, that's a good question. Somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago, I started to see searches where CEOs had a strong preference for someone who spent, let's call it, significant to the majority of their career outside of HR. And then have had run some searches where it was so far to one end of the spectrum where they really wanted to consider people that only were, quote, dangerous in HR, but had mostly done other things and were essentially a business person who had a strong interest in moving their career in that, in that direction. But I would say that kind of where it seems to be landing, and I just ran a search like this where we were looking at former COOs and other very operational people who transitioned very late into the world of HR CPO type role. They're really interesting candidates, I think, at a certain level for the clients. But then at the end of the day, you're still trying to solve for someone who is has the depth and the function, like all of the G&A roles. You need the functional leader usually to be the deepest functional expert. You want your GC to be the best lawyer in the company. You want your CFO to be the best financial mind of the company. It's a little weird to sometimes to have the HR leader not know that much about HR. They're a little bit dangerous, maybe a little risky. Doesn't mean you can't do it successfully. You got to have a really great team underneath them. So when I see that across the range of companies, I see larger companies being able to place a bigger bet on pulling in call it leader of North America for one of the big three consulting firms, and plopping them in on top because they're going to be very strategic and they have a team that they can lean on. It's a little harder in a smaller company where you just don't have the depth and the bench underneath you. And you need someone who's actually gone through the reps on these decisions. Like what have we done in this? What are we doing about review cycles? And how does that tie into compensation? And, all these questions that HR folks have been answering for many, many years. So kind of flows back and forth. And I've even done a search where the client had that business person turned HR person. And then when they kicked off the search to replace them, they were like, you know what, let's just go get more of the traditional profile because we like somebody who's really lived and been living and breathing it for a long time. But I think that the optimal mix is someone who has spent time in some way developing business acumen, whether it's by being a consultant, getting an MBA, having some sort of an early career. It doesn't necessarily have to go on and be an executive in a different function, but like having that grounding in the business and just thinking about solving problems in the business, because I think that's what they want people to do is like solve business problems first, use HR levers to solve them, second.
I 100% agree with everything Ben just said. I mean, the difficulty is there's sort of two proxies we see that CEOs use to gauge that business acumen. It's what Ben said, business school, 3 years in McKinsey, started in finance and then suddenly pivoted and they have 7 years of HR experience now. If you have that background, you are like in demand right now. The other proxy that makes things difficult for us is they want someone who's gone through the growth curve and designed the car, not just driven the car. And so the number of times I have founders that say, I would like you to find me the person that took the company successfully from 500 to 5,000 people. And my answer is usually, if we find someone that's successfully done that, they probably don't want to do it again because it takes years off your life. If you've done it really successfully, then you don't have to work anymore. So if anybody listening is one of those people that likes to do that multiple times, please call Ben and I. We have spots for you right now.
I feel like I've been hearing founders asking for that profile for a very long time of, hey, somebody who's been there and done that, has done that a few times over and wants to do it yet again. And I think you're absolutely right. Like the amount of energy and motivation to do it like a fourth, fifth, sixth time is on the more rare side. But what I'm hearing more so is just like this blend of whether you grew up in HR or not, you need both. You need to have some HR acumen and you need to have business acumen. But the leaning that we're hearing nowadays is that business first, solve the business problem first, and then come and use your HR skills alongside that.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jess. I don't want to speak for Ben, but when you're interviewing an HR executive, if when you ask the question, they start with the business problem and then tell you how they use data and build a minimal viable product and did test and control and then came up with an HR solution versus someone that just starts with, let me show you what I did in HR.
Yeah. What an insightful tip too for anybody who's interviewing for a chief people officer role right now is like, yeah, start with the business problem, the business strategy before getting into the rest of it.
And I would add one thing. So it's not depressing for people who decided to go into HR in the beginning of their career and really love it and want to stay with it. It doesn't mean you can't be one of the great candidates, but it means you do need to find ways to really build and flex that business acumen muscle along the way. I have also placed phenomenal candidates that are straight line through their career as HR from beginning to where they are today, and they are as competitive as anybody else. But it's because when the CEOs meet them, they're like, they just get the business. I'm talking to a business person, to Brad's point, you ask them, what did you do? And they just talk about the business problems that they were faced with and that they solve. And then they're like, and here's how we did it from my function, And so you just needed to build that muscle, and then you can be as competitive as anybody else.
And, the other thing, Jess, is I think in some cases we've seen the pendulum swing too far where they're taking, an engineer who's, I'm generalizing here, but fairly robotic and unempathetic and putting them into HR. And that may not be the right answer either, because the employees need someone who's balancing the business with empathy and, thinking about culture and engagement. And so, we got to be careful we don't swing too far to the analytical side.
Absolutely. So this well-roundedness is really the secret sauce is like, how do you find that right balance of characteristics? You had said something interesting around AI and some of these leaders wanting to hire someone who can attract the $1 million engineer. How do you
100 million.
100 million, pardon me. Yeah, only $1 million. That's so affordable these days. $100 million engineer. How do you screen for that? Like, what are the characteristics that they're looking for? Because it's not like many people are even hiring for these engineers. And so there isn't going to be a long track record that you can go off of.
Yeah. We're all talking and working with AI companies from, truly native AI companies to those that are trying to become more of an AI company over time. And we've seen this before in technology where there's a new type of technology company. And for a moment in time, you basically have to pull the best. You really have to look at who are the most closely correlated experiences to what we're going through and then pull those people over because we're not in a state right now where there's nobody that you can point to who's been recruiting, generally speaking, building AI organizations for the last 10 years. People just don't have a deep track record, right? And so you're going to look then to people in other places, in other highly competitive talent markets. Where have you been able to be successful and compete against the most competitive companies? Where have you been able to punch above your weight from a recruiting perspective back, which now seems like the distant past when everybody was going against the FANGs, when we used to talk about FANGs and, how did smaller companies compete against those companies for all the traditional engineers that were coming out of school and, and the senior engineers. And so it's going to be correlated, experiences, I think is what a lot of them are going for right now. But over time, that'll transition. I think the value of having experience in a quote native AI company will become more and more valuable. And certainly for some companies, probably a few to 5 years from now will become table stakes in terms of who they would consider to join the organization. But we're not there yet.
Hey, hang tight. Here's something you'll want to know if you're leading people at a high growth company. Level up as an HR leader and join a lifetime community with People Leader Accelerator. Our spring cohort is open now. Apply today. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, that terminology you're using of correlated experience is so powerful, though, because I think it helps to highlight for anybody who's in these conversations right now of what is my correlated experience to this if I don't have something directly that I can contribute in this way. I'd love to switch gears just a little bit with asking about titles, because some companies are looking for a head of HR, some are looking for a VP, some are looking for a chief people officer. From your lenses, I'm curious, how do you think about the differences or distinctions that have you think, oh, this person's at a higher level? Are there distinctions between these titles? What's your interpretation of it?
I would say most of the time, the majority of the time, it's about internal equity. So if you're not calling all your direct reports to the CEO a chief, then you certainly don't want to use that for HR if you don't have a chief technology officer or chief marketing officer. What we see is people use head of HR or head of people, and at the moment the company goes public, they'll usually move to the C-suite titles. And at that point, someone could get a chance to step up. Some people are very title focused. My advice is, look, why not come in as a head of people, go through the growth curve, and it gives you a new opportunity to renegotiate everything when you move to the chief people officer. If you come in as a chief people officer now, you don't get that opportunity to renegotiate it. I will tell you that in other cases, it's because of where the position reports. And when we get called in for a search and it doesn't report to the CEO, I'm very upfront with the client that you're going to lose 50% of the market. There are 50% of HR candidates who will not engage and talk to you because of where it reports.
I've known head of people candidates that have 1,000-person organizations they're a part of, and they're the top person reporting to CEO. And I've recruited in CPOs that have fewer than 100 employees. When there's a war for talent going on, it's been a little soft for the last few years. I think it does seem clearly to be really heating up. Title is one of the easy things to give away because it doesn't really cost you anything from the company perspective. And so you see a lot of people starting to get those C titles that you wouldn't have seen in the past. And so it just mixes it all up into one. I don't focus on title personally when I'm assessing people. I don't really care. I counsel my clients to not focus on that. They can sometimes get caught up in it. I'm definitely doing some searches right now where VP versus not VP, when you're looking for a C person and you're like, don't think about it that way. First of all, what's the size of the company they're coming from? What are all these different things? It's like scope, responsibility, team size. Those are much more important than whether there's a C, a V, or an H in front of the title. And to Brad's point, I counsel people not to get so focused on, their own title. There's always opportunity to change, but you understand, because once you get to the C thing, there's a real resistance to go back So you can box yourself in at the same time and miss out on some opportunities. I'm sure, some people do because they're just perceived as this C person who's also perceived as like maybe not as hands-on, as there's this notion that C-level executives are less hands-on and operate larger teams. It's not always true, of course, but so it's not always the trade-off that you want it to be. And so you want to, don't over-index on it, but the span of control, like reporting structure, those are probably some of the things that you're better off focusing on.
And Ben, I would say, money's always a part of this too, right? And like the good news for HR leaders is coming out of the pandemic, we now know that they're not in last place. If you take out the CFO, who's pretty much in a clear number 2 position, and these are public companies I'm talking about in terms of total compensation, we've seen HR for the first time be on par with the general counsel, the chief marketing officer, and chief product officers, other directs, which is great news for the function. And in many cases, when we're interviewing someone, trying to pull them out of a job that they're doing well in, and we start to negotiate comp, they're like, I just don't want to be last. So I'm going to know day one if you told me the truth or not. So that's something we talk about up front with the CEOs and founders is like, depending on the caliber of person you want, they're going to have expectations around this.
Yeah. And, those expectations, I would love to dive into a bit on the trends that you're seeing with salary, because I think in the broader tech market and in startups, like salaries pulled back over the last stretch. What are you seeing on the front from, the people leadership roles of what's happening from the overall trends in compensation, both cash and equity?
My perspective is that the comp information that I have and that we have in executive search is not representative of the market as a whole, because companies don't go to search for every role, and there are companies who don't use search as much as others, and they are often the ones that are not going to pay as competitively. The searches that I see, I actually didn't see a comp drop in terms of like cash or equity grants at all. I've seen a fewer number of overall searches in the system at one time, but I didn't see comp drop, maybe flattening compared to the steep rise that it went from, call it 2012 to 2022. There was a steep climb of everyone's comp, especially HR relative to the others. And so maybe it started to flatten out a little bit over the last few years, but I never saw it go down. And I would say also, even while the market has continued to improve coming out of, let's call it mid 24, when it really started to emerge, I saw the largest equity package I've ever seen for a private company CPO delivered. And so like comps, there is actually some massive packages that are out there. I think from a cash perspective, as a private company, there's going to be natural constraints because they don't want to pay mostly in cash. They'd much rather pay, the majority of it in equity. So that's just how it's structured. So that's a little bit more reasonable from a cash perspective. But I've actually also known growth stage businesses, late stage businesses who, should the executive want to trade cash for equity, they've actually delivered like very high six-figure total cash packages, which is something you don't normally see. I think as things are heating up, it's going to continue going up. Also, competitive forces, like to Brad's point earlier, like there are a small number, by definition, only 1 in 10 people are like top 10 percentile. I try to remind my clients of that. So, you got to remember there are few people out there that are truly outstanding, and those people can really command the comp that they want. And so you'll just see those numbers continue to rise.
I totally agree with Ben. I haven't seen a decline. In fact, I would describe it as a pretty big disconnect in the market between what CEOs think they should be able to get somebody for, and then massive sticker shock when they see, based on all their requirements, many of the things we were just talking about, like, previously went through the growth curve, have an MBA, worked at McKinsey, you start to look for that top percentile, and it's a big gap. And I have a lot of frustrated clients frustrated with me because I'm presenting them what they want, and literally the price tag of a number 2 that has never been a number 1 is exceeding, and they don't like the number 2s. They want a number 1, right? And we've had to say, like, you can't afford these people, so you're going to have to take a number 2.
Wow. How do you help your clients navigate sort of the negotiation process of that? Like, we want somebody, we can't afford them, it must vary so much of like whether the company budgets or the ideal candidate is, taking a step back. But are there like,
It's all data, Jess. Like we take all the emotion out of it and we're like, all right, here's the Fortune 1000 number ones and number twos. You need somebody in Des Moines, Iowa. Here's the addressable market that's already there. You want someone that has runway in their career. You want somebody that has all these attributes, and you take them down the funnel and you're like, okay, there's 4 people. That's not going to take very long to get to those. But then what do you want to do?
Yeah. And that's the trick with private companies because it's more difficult to get robust comp information. I would say over the last decade, we have fewer reliable comp studies than we had 10 years ago. And so contributes to the disconnect that Brad was talking about, which is a very real thing. And so data is the best way we can do it, but it's like largely, it's anecdotal data from I'm, running handfuls of searches of data, but it's never going to be a large enough sample size to really, get somebody comfort that like is truly representative of the market, but it will show you what's representative of the top of the market, the best people, because these are competitive searches, great companies that are going to search and trying to recruit great people. So you can see the people that they're recruiting. You get a sense for what these people cost, though, obviously we don't share directly, information. It's confidential, of course, but, try to give them a sense for like size and scale of the business. And this is what they recruited and describing the kind of person, 1, 2-time former public company, that kind of thing. And that can help them get around to it. But I would say it's still very emotional issue for them, especially if it's a first time. When I do a first time CPO, they always have an HR organization of some sort in place, but going and getting that first strategic executive, they do often have like real sticker shock over, I had no idea these people were comped just like my XY, executive. But they are. But it's interesting because I'll work with other CEOs and they'll be like, yeah, absolutely. This is the most important role in my company. And so it does just depend upon how they think about it.
And one factor, Ben, we haven't talked about is relocation. So people just do not want to relocate in general right now. They don't want to uproot their families and move. But the majority of my jobs are in San Francisco and New York. And if you moved to Denver, Florida, and now we're saying, okay, we want you to take a lateral, offer, but you got to be in the office 3 days a week in San Francisco or New York. People are just saying like, no. And that eliminates a big chunk of the talent pool. So again, for all the people out there living somewhere that are willing to move to San Francisco and New York, get in touch with Ben and I, because there's a lot of jobs and a limited number of people that are willing to relocate.
I'm wondering if remote work and hybrid work and how it might be changing exec search. Are companies just holding out thinking I can get the perfect person right now that meets all the spec if I'm willing to let them work remote? Or is the decision about in-office versus hybrid versus remote happening a little further upstream? And, is the in-office status serving as a hard disqualifier, or are a lot of companies actually willing to consider which path to take?
It's swung so far, Andrew. It's like a hard disqualifier now. These people are like, they have to buy a home in where the corporate headquarters is. Like, it's not even like get an apartment and I don't care what you're doing on the weekends. They're like, I want to know this person's going to relocate and buy a home. And there was a beautiful 2 years there coming out of the pandemic. I'm sure Ben would agree, 21 and 22. Like, our jobs were so much easier because we're like, we want to hire the best talent wherever they are. You can live wherever. It opened up the talent pool tremendously. And then it just like the door slammed shut in 2023.
Yeah, I kind of see it in 2 ways. Like Brad, I do most of my work, given the nature of the companies that I mostly work with, tech companies, it's mostly in the Bay Area and New York. Those are the 2 biggest markets by a lot. And so those are big talent pools. And the companies that are there do not feel like they have to compromise on that. They're like, we have more people than anywhere else. And so we can find our person here. And I think they're generally right. And so I haven't seen those companies that have a return to office policy in place willing to budge. The companies that have a return to office that are in a secondary tech market, they're just smaller. You run through that market, and if you don't find their answer, I have seen them then be flexible, especially if they have a hub model. Sometimes they do. They could be in a different office or something like that, somewhere nearby. So they tend to, I think, flex a little bit more from that hard line, but everybody starts off with like, no, they've got to be right here. But if you're in Austin, you may not find your answer there, and that's the reality. And then you might have to get a little flexible. And then there's a set of companies that are culturally, they're remote first. And so I'm still working with some of those. It's about 10 to 20% at any given time. And they're always going to be that way. It's sort of like they've either always been that way or they've become that way and they don't want to unwind it because it actually works for them. And it's kind of in two ways. You're either completely remote. There are a lot of companies that have an RTO, but they also have a lot of remote employees because like they're not going to go and rehire thousands of people in one place, but they'll talk about, we want the executive team in one place. But if the executive team is scattered and they're functioning at a high level, like then they have the flexibility. It's like, no, actually, we know how to make it work, and this person could be anywhere. So they're going to continue to look in a remote fashion. And that does give them that flexibility. What's interesting on the flip side of that is like a lot of candidates and a lot of chief people officers that I talk to, but not just other executives too, they're like, when they're starting to look around and they give Brad and me a call and say, hey, keep me in mind, they'll often telling me, hey, I really have a strong preference. I can do remote. If they're in one of those major metro areas, I can do remote, but I'd really much rather be in person because that's how I can influence and work with the team. And they actually crave it too. If you have moved to Bozeman, Montana, you're probably like, I want to do remote, you don't want to move again. But there's a lot of the candidates actually are like looking for something where they're like, it's too hard to do this and connect with people. I think less so if the entire executive team is remote, but when they are the only person who's remote and the rest of them are all getting together regularly in New York, for example, it's just, you feel really out of it, pretty quickly. And we're still trying to work through solving that. But I think that's, some of the stuff that we're seeing people thinking about.
Tricky with the office, like for companies that do have an office culture, this is one role in particular. When you don't have a pulse on what's happening with those people who are meeting live, it can make things much more difficult to understand how to prioritize and how to influence.
Hey, that was a personal experience for me. My last in-house gig was a company that is now known as Invitation Homes, became an S&P 500 level company. And I was on an airplane on Monday, flying from the Bay Area to Arizona, home on Friday. And then the headquarters moved to Dallas, and that's when I, pulled my parachute and didn't agree to commute or move to Dallas. It is a major disruption for the person doing the work. But in my private equity work, I see a lot of executives, mostly CEOs, in these niche businesses that are flying in and out or claiming, true or less true, I'm spending half my time on the road with customers anyway. Why does it matter where I live? Yeah, the location centricity is an interesting area that'll probably continue to evolve. Actually, I'd love to get your feedback. I didn't include this in the show notes, so here we go. Here's a surprise. I wrote something a few months ago called The Worst of Both Worlds. My perspective that hybrid is the worst of both worlds from a company's perspective, in that you limit the geographic reach of your recruiting, because somebody needs to be able to get into the office 2 or 3 days a week. So that's a bad thing. And you're not getting a potential labor cost benefit by recruiting in lower cost markets. And you have people that are not in office 5 days a week. It's hybrid, right? So you're missing out on that, crackling energy of bumping into each other. And you're paying for all the commercial office space. So these are like negative, negative, negative. Limited talent pool, maximum possible labor cost, and you have all the corporate facility overhead. I guess as search leaders, do you have any perspective on, is remote better? Is in office better? Is hybrid the way to go? Or is that something that you would prefer not to advise on?
I mean, I love Nick Bloom's research at Stanford, and he's a big proponent of hybrid. And I think one of the things that I think about a lot is the last of the baby boomer CEOs will retire in 2030. And that was the last generation. And I remember starting work. I couldn't work after 6 and I couldn't work on the weekends because I didn't have a cell phone and I didn't have a laptop. Like there was no possible way to connect with my office. And I mean, there's a whole couple generations of people that never experienced that time off of work. So the people taking over now through 2030 and beyond, they have been digital natives in the sense that they've had to work and not work at the same time since they started. And to me, that's where hybrid wins. They need flexibility to go work out in the middle of the day, to pick their kids up from school. They're working at 9 o'clock at night. They're working on the weekends. They never stop. I just don't think you can force those people into this 5 days in the office for a certain number of hours. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think a little bit depends on where you're coming from and where you're trying to go. So it's a little bit relative. So we are remote. We have concentrations of people in the Bay Area and in New York, but we also have my CEOs in at least half the time in Florida, and we're not going to get an office there. As much as that's the thing probably I miss is like not going to the office as I've had through almost all of the rest of my career. It's a trade-off that we're making, and we make it work in other ways. And I think a lot of the remote first companies are doing something similarly, right? And you do get benefits, like you get to access talent everywhere. But there are a lot of companies that are situated in those major talent markets. And for me, I feel like the hybrid is a little bit of like 2019 California, Bay Area anyway. Because like when I was doing searches in 2019, there are great people who live down in Cupertino, and I do a search for a San Francisco company, and we were already, they're like, I can get there 2 to 3 days a week there, but there's no way with the commuting and the traffic. And the pandemic only, I think, solidified the understanding that people can be highly productive remotely. And so you don't need to make somebody get on the road all the time. What I think of as hybrid is it's just the way that things are being done in places like the Bay Area for a lot longer. It started off with like, you don't have to come into the office on a Friday, but you were still working to, it's going to be more like 2 or 3 days working from home, really mostly just to avoid the commute. But I think also to Brad's point, now it's also just a little bit more flexibility in the day. I think though that with however you do it, and this comes down to the CPO, you've got to be very intentional about what that means. This is our system. The way we do things then flow from that. Like when I've done searches for remote companies, some executives that I consider to be expert at this, that were remote specialists before the pandemic, even the way that they would run. So often in our searches, we'll have a presentation moment, where you get together with the executives and talk through like a prompt and problems. And one of them that I'm thinking of in particular, he's like, oh, well, I'm going to pre-record this stuff. This is how we should be doing meetings anyway. I'm going to give you this information. So I'm not wasting time kind of just going through it together. That way you can like think about it, digest it. And I have these technologies that I use that allow you to do that. And then we go in and then we like really have fast forwarded, our momentum and our ability to like work together. And so that's an example. Like if you're going to do remote things, you can't be just doing it the same old way and then just getting on video. You've got to really think about how are you going to use that off time to really advance the ball. And then if you're in hybrid, same thing, and be just very thoughtful about what the in-person time does look like, what the not in-person remote time looks like. And that's where I think people are still, learning and trying to figure it out.
For me, I think hybrid is really not necessarily best or worst. It's certainly the most complex because it requires thinking about both sides of it. But Ben, you're bringing up an excellent piece of all of the executive search stuff, which is the process. And for somebody who's never done executive search before, say we have some folks in our audience who are thinking like, well, one day I want to be ahead of people and I'm going to go through this process. What's different for them that to expect that is a shift from how they might have interviewed for a director role or another leadership role versus an executive level C-suite role? And are there any unique pieces, like you mentioned, oh, you might have to do a presentation. Like, what are some things that are sort of standard that you're seeing nowadays in this process that have come up?
The first thing I think that is going to be different is that you're not going to be interviewing with people primarily that come from your world, come from your function. And so when you're rising up the ranks in the world of whatever function you're in, you're interviewing with future bosses and they do what you do. They used to do what you do, all of that stuff. You're then interviewing with CEO, COO, whatever it is, all of the other parts of the business and you've got to speak in a different way. It's a little bit about that business acumen that we talked about, but like you've got to change your mindset. Like they're not thinking about all the HR stuff, and you need to be able to talk about it and connect it to the rest of the business. It's the business they're really going to be focused on, and you've got to realize that's your audience now. And so know your audience, know what's on their mind, know what they're thinking about. And that's I think one of the biggest shifts, because whenever I do those big number two jobs that report to CPO, I actually find them in many ways much easier because it's like we all speak the same language and I mean, you're still looking for great people, but like they know it. The hiring manager knows it. They recognize it. You just get really high, strong signals. And that's one of the things when you're looking cross-functionally, like to find that signal that both sides are looking for can be more difficult. So you've got to find like the common language so you can make those connections.
Jess, I would just add for your audience, like when people have a chance to meet Ben and I, we view it as a lifetime relationship. If you're really good and you're in a number one or a number two job, we want to know you. And when we're talking to you, it may not be about one specific opportunity. We could be working on 6 or 8, all with different requirements. And so being super open and forthcoming about like your motivations, your aspirations, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. And that's really important to kind of capture. And I think just really important to know your search partners in your functional area across the firms, because it could be a lottery ticket. Like when we call, we don't even often say what company it is, but it could be life-changing. So if people don't know us, I think it's really important to reach out and build that relationship, whether there's an open search or not.
And is that something you would encourage, that if there is a candidate listening right now and is like, wow, I'm looking, I don't know Ben or Brad yet, should they go and find you and say, hey, can I get some time to get to know you? Is that preferred?
Yes. In short, yes. People do that every day. We can't always meet people right away, but like at least we'll have them on our radar screen. At least we'll know who they are. It's really important for you to manage your career, and you don't want to just rely on the network that you have. That's great. A lot of people like go very far with just getting jobs from their network, but like there are great jobs that are being run through searches, and you also want to have access to those things, especially as you become more senior. So yeah, get to know us.
And at the same time, this is protecting you. Don't blow you guys up. Like it's not your job to find people jobs. You're working for the company to find their executive hire. And so, sometimes I find people asking for intros to recruiters. I'm on the market. Who are the recruiters I should speak to? And there's an expectation that you're almost like a real estate agent that's going to like walk them around to all the various jobs and all the various houses.
It's a great point, Andrew, because it's like you're getting to know someone. Trust me, we put all that information in our system. We capture it. We would love to put you into a big job because that's how we continue to build our business. We help you build your team after we put you in. So we're very motivated to do that. But, if I don't have something that's open, that's relevant for you today, calling me next week is probably not going to be helpful.
Yeah. Get on your radar screen, follow you. Actually, let's move into what we call our accelerator round, which is, quick answers to a few questions. I think we have 4 questions I'd like to tee up. Let's go to Brad first for each question, and Ben, you get the final word on each question. And let's share some nuggets with our audience. Brad, where do you learn from, and what sources would you recommend that our listeners tune into?
I'm really somewhat newly devoted to podcasts. So I love the All In podcast. If you want to hear about what's happening in technology in Silicon Valley, I find that to be really great. And to be honest, Andrew, I started organizing breakfast and dinners with CHROs, and we probably get 12 to 20 of them 4 times a year in multiple cities. And I learned from them. I'm like, what's going on? What's top of mind? And there's just one crisis after another that's always top of mind. And right now it's workforce planning in the world of AI. So I find that I learn from them, and then it kind of keeps me sharp.
Love it. Ben, how about you?
I look at it from a wide range of sources. I was going to joke, and it's a half joke. It's like I learn exclusively from ChatGPT now, but I do use it a lot, leverage it for all kinds of things. But I try to do a lot of reading. I definitely am always talking Brad and I are always talking to people. That's like actually how we spend most of our time. And so it's the triangulation between what I'm talking to with a CEO I'm working with and his team, and what I'm hearing from candidates, and what I'm reading about in a really cool newsletter that I follow, and then what I hear about on a podcast, all this stuff. And when you start to see multiple people kind of converging on certain topics and like the different points of view, is where you're like, okay, this is important. This is like something that we should keep talking about. And that's kind of how I go about it.
I like it. I guess in your roles, you're naturally externally facing. So you're always absorbing what's happening in the broader market. Brad, and then to Ben next. What HR trend are you most excited about right now? And is there any HR trend that, is annoying?
I mean, I think we're headed into a renaissance. I think AI is it's gonna change our worlds bigger than internet, mobile, social. And I went through all those changes and loved it. And I've been leaning in. I had an intern who was a neuroscience major, and her job this summer was to look at every part of the search process and tell me how you'd use AI. And I learned so much from her. So like I'm an optimist, but I think there's just going to be a whole new world.
And nothing annoys you, Brad?
Well, that disconnect between what talent costs and what people are willing to pay right now
there you go.
is pretty annoying.
There you go.
I agree. I think AI is the most exciting thing that we've seen in a long time. What I'm personally excited about, because these are the people that Brad and I work with day in and day out, is the CPO's role in this whole thing. Because there's how does AI impact my function? And because we're, as a new firm who's aiming to be the most tech forward firm, we invest a lot in these types of tools, and we're doing a lot of like sessions with our partners and clients and all these stuff, like helping them get up to speed, because everybody's trying to learn and trying to help one another kind of figure all this stuff out. And it's going to take a while to get it. But there's this awesome opportunity to like essentially like, instead of building market maps in 8 weeks, build it in 8 seconds. And then how much time does that then give you to do other very important things? And so there's that work that goes on within HR, but then there's the work of, as Brad was alluding to, like the workforce of the future. What does the combination of people and technology look like going forward? How do we build a company that delivers more output with a very different combination? What are the skills that you're going to need to have in those people to be able to leverage those technologies? Because I would say that, like, while I think most people are using AI, from what I've seen going through a lot of the sessions that we're doing, most people are very surface level at the same time. And so there's this opportunity that many of us will crack, that I think the CPO is going to take a central role. There was conversation around this a couple of years, like, is every company going to have a chief AI officer? I'm not really seeing that the way certain companies were doing chief digital officers and things in the past, but somebody's going to need to own, and it's naturally in the CPO's world, like, what is the workforce? And I think that workforce is that combination of technology. It'll probably be working if a company has a more of a CIO type person, like, what are the technologies that we're going to buy that are going to bring in to like create this productivity? But it's this interesting new mix that we all know is going to be different. And I think the CPO is like in the center of that and has an opportunity to really become expert in that, because we all know there's going to be tremendous change in that, right? But we don't know where it's going. And so all people in HR have this opportunity, I think, to get really smart on this and bring a lot of value to their companies if they can start to figure out some of these answers.
I'm hearing you say marrying AI and the human element is the thing that's exciting and challenging at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Again, a nugget of advice for our listeners who are typically mid to senior level HR professionals. What's your best piece of advice to them to accelerate their own careers in today's environment?
I would say to get involved in cross-functional transformation projects like what Ben's talking about. Be the HR lead for your AI transformation at your company. Go work on a merger or acquisition. It helps you develop that business acumen, and it helps you show up from a resume perspective where you've led an enterprise change and can talk about it start to finish.
Yeah, get it more involved in the business. And I think that what Brad's saying is like a great way to do that. But not everyone will have maybe that equal opportunity depending on the nature of their business, but like get involved much more working cross-functionally with the business that'll bring you different perspectives, different experiences and opportunities. You'll be a better HR person going forward if you like really engage in that way. And you've just got to kind of push for it. Like it's very easy to kind of sit and just be, hey, I'm staying within your lane. Obviously, as companies become larger, they try to put people in lanes. And generally, in my experience, talented people who have the ability to contribute across outside of their remit and their function, like that's generally welcomed. I mean, anybody who can help the business be better is usually welcomed. And so try to find those opportunities.
One of the things we talk about in People Leader Accelerator, actually did it this morning. We build a strategic people plan and we ask our participants to identify what are the top few functional initiatives that you have. And then we poke and we prod and we pressure test. And ultimately what we're looking for generally is for people to tie their functional initiatives directly and clearly to the top business initiatives. So instead of working on HR projects as the HR leader for HR purposes, if what you're trying to do is increase revenue or get a new product out the door or open a new geography, make sure that what you're working on is obviously connected to those things rather than being kind of a big peanut butter program across the whole org. So be targeted, and just how you talk about that is that sort of business acumen.
People are less interested in how the employee opinion scores went up a couple points.
Yeah. Last question for the two of you. How can our listeners get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Probably the easiest two simplest ways are connecting on LinkedIn and reaching out over email. I publicly display it, so it's ben@newsearch.com. So those are easy ways, should always be an easy way to get to me.
And that's New Search NU, not NEW. Right on. Great. How about you, Brad?
Exactly the same. I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn, getting closer to my limit. I didn't actually know until recently that LinkedIn has a limit, but I was informed. And then email bwarga, BWARGA @hydric.com.
Thank you to you both for coming in and sharing your extensive wisdom. Hopefully this conversation helps to spur more of that supply in the market that is much more business first. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Ben. We are so grateful for your time today. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of People Leader Accelerator podcast, where we talk with business and HR leaders about what makes great leadership and great work. We hope you walked away with at least one game-changing insight for you and your team. You can find show notes and free bonus resources at peopleleaderaccelerator.com/podcast. If today's conversation sparked something for you, hit subscribe, leave a quick review, and share this episode with that one colleague who really needs to hear it. You know who I'm talking about. And if you're currently navigating the tricky waters of hiring top talent, developing leaders who actually lead, or building a culture that fuels growth, let's talk. You can find us at peopleleaderaccelerator.com. We're here to help you and your team not just survive, but truly thrive. I'm Jess Yuen, and on behalf of my co-host, Andrew Bartlow, thanks for investing your valuable time with us. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. Until next time, keep learning and keep leading.